My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak of Invisibility. Together they make the Deathly Hallows. Together they make one Master of Death. The last will and testament of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore.
Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living. And above all those who live without love.
Hey everyone, welcome to Hogwarts, a podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hogwarts, a podcast. We are covering Chapter 11, The Bribe.
Hello everyone.
That voice is Elizabeth. She is back with us today.
Didn't even have to bribe me to be here.
Nope. This is a loaded chapter, and we have a lot to discuss.
Don't undersell it.
Both Elizabeth and I have some opinions on what happens in this chapter. I feel like it's safe to say. Mm-hmm. And the great thing is, we're not the only ones with opinions on some of the topics that's discussed in this chapter.
No.
We have gotten so many comments from listeners over the last week or two. From all the episodes we've had, a lot of them have been about my hot takes.
That's awesome that the people are sharing their thoughts.
It's great. Whether you agree or disagree, it's great to get the feedback. It's great to get really lengthy responses, really, which we love to read. We love to see that, and we will shout them out. We have a couple that we're going to shout out in this episode. They're going to be from Sandhya, Robear's Books from Instagram, and Tony. We're going to shout you guys out. Well, I just did. But we're going to...
You'll read the comments later.
We'll actually get into what comments you left at the end of the non-spoiler. Because all three of those comments, have to do with topics from this chapter. So we'll kind of get through the chapter, and then we'll get the listeners' perspectives, and then we can kind of comment on their comments.
Sounds good.
If you guys want to leave a comment, please do so by commenting on our Twitter, our Instagram. You can comment on YouTube, and you can leave a comment here on Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. You can find any of our socials at Hogwarts a Pod. We really, like I said, we really love hearing about all of your thoughts and opinions on our thoughts and opinions. You can also participate on polls. We sometimes run the polls on Instagram and Twitter. We also have the poll that's on Spotify if you're listening there as well.
And those are open for a long time. So if you want to go back and vote on every single chapter, by all means, go for it.
Yep. So this chapter specifically, we get two big characters that make appearances in this chapter. We get a visit from one Remus Lupin, and we get a reappearance of Creature, and he has a certain someone with him as well.
Would you say he's a visitor or a captive?
More captive. You're right, he's more captive. That's fair. So obviously, this chapter begins with Creature still on the hunt. He hasn't returned. It's been a couple of days, and the trio is getting a little restless, a little irritable. They're starting to chip at each other a little bit.
I think they're hangry as much as they are anxious, because they were talking about Hermione trying to transfigure moldy bread as their dinner. So it's just that sounds appetizing.
It's one of the few times Hermione has not succeeded with her spell work. So yeah. A little hangry, a little irritable, a little restless. But then we get a visitor. And that visitor is Remus Lupin. He arrives on the doorstep, and Harry happens to hear the locks clicking on the door. And he is on guard. He thinks this is going to be Severus Snape or another Death Eater or something like that. So he is on guard.
Which, putting yourself into his shoes, like, that had to have been terrifying.
Yeah, you're not expecting someone at the door.
I mean, I freak out whenever anyone rings my doorbell in general, and I'm not in a war, and I'm not the most wanted person in the country, so I would be hardcore freaking out right now.
That's fair. Harry does well in these freak out situations, though, generally. Mm-hmm. And he's ready. So after Remus gets through Moody's enchantments of the tongue rolling back and the ghostly figure of Albus Dumbledore, Harry's like, wait. Who are you? Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm Remus Lupin. At this point, Hermione and Ron have joined the fray, and they relax their wands.
Yes.
Harry's like, that's great, you're Remus Lupin. Prove it. Mm-hmm. And Lupin goes through a actual litany of items. I mean, he goes through so many.
I mean, he was like, I taught you defense against dark arts. I taught you how to make a Patronus. Your Patronus happens to be a stag. I'm married to Tonks. I'm X, Y, and Z.
I'm an author of the Marauders Map. Uh-huh. I go by the name of Mooney. Like, he
All
goes through
things.
So many things. And Harry's like,
it's
okay.
like his bio on his social media.
He just provided Harry with his LinkedIn.
Yep.
And Harry's like, okay. But I kind of had to do it, right?
Yes.
And Remus is like, speaking as your former Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, you were fantastic.
Yes.
Ron and Hermione, though, very disappointed in you. Don't be so quick to let down your guard. It's this funny little moment before a lot of the serious stuff comes in, but it's a nice light moment. He does inform them that he was able to get to Grimmauld Place without alerting the Death Eaters outside by apparating very precisely on the top step.
Which, when you think about it, that has to be so difficult. I mean, I know Lupin has been able to apparate for however long he's been doing it, years, but that'd be like asking somebody to parallel park within 6-7 months of getting that license. Like, unless you're doing it every single day, it's a little tricky.
Well, and just the act of apparating and disapparating is so disorienting.
Yeah.
So, like you said, he's experienced that. He's been doing it for a long, long time. But I imagine it's hard, especially on a very precise step. I can't imagine it's a very large step.
No.
So you have to really be precise, and you have to keep your balance.
Mm-hmm. It does give the kids a nice out, though, because if they are going to be able to leave the house and get food and whatever under the invisibility cloak, like, this means you're not trapped anymore. You have a little tiny window to escape through without being caught by the Death Eaters.
For sure. It's definitely a loophole that he provides.
Very much so.
He also alerts them that Death Eaters happen to be stalking every place that Harry might be. Mm-hmm. And hence the couple outside Grimmauld Place. So just heads up, if you're thinking about going somewhere you think you might be comfortable,
don't.
Yeah. Be alert. Be on guard. So both parties, the trio and Lupin, are in the same situation. They want information on the events that happened directly after the wedding. Mm-hmm. They both want to know each other's kind of point of view and what exactly happened. Lupin, from his point of view, is absolutely stunned that Death Eaters were able to find the trio in London so quickly.
Yeah, he's more freaked out than the kids are, honestly. I mean, like, obviously they are freaked out at the moment, but it's just like, there is absolutely no reason why the Death Eaters should find you in the Muggle world immediately. That's really bad news.
I think the trio was a little less worried about it because they just assumed it was the trace. Like, they assumed they had an answer for it.
Yeah.
And then Lupin's like, no,
that's not how that works.
That's not how that works. That's impossible. Mm-hmm. But before they can really dwell on that, they get to Lupin's side of the wedding. Mm-hmm. And he mentions that Kingsley really saved them all.
Yeah.
With the warning. After the warning from Kingsley, a mixture of Death Eaters and Ministry of Magic officials were apparating in. Mm-hmm. And there were about 12 of them. And he says this, and I'll quote from the book. Quote, "But to all intents and purposes, they're the same thing now. There were about a dozen of them, but they didn't know you were there, Harry. Arthur heard a rumor that they tried to torture your whereabouts out of Scrimgeour before they killed him. If it's true, he didn't give you away. Mm-hmm. Which I think is an interesting... That's a lot of information that he drops.
Yeah.
Obviously there's a mixture of Death Eaters and Ministry of Magic officials.
And it's interesting knowing now that they are essentially the same thing. Mm-hmm. Like, if the ministry has fallen, then you're just going to have to assume that every ministry official has been, like, placed under some curse. And even if they're not, they're doing the bidding of Voldemort, so you should not trust them.
It has some major consequences, which we'll get into a little bit later. He also says that the Death Eaters didn't seem to know Harry would be at the Burrow. Mm-hmm. And then obviously the line about them trying to torture Harry's whereabouts out of Rufus prior to them killing him, and he seemed not to give him up. This is greeted by both shock and gratitude from the trio. Harry mentioned specifically he's never really liked Rufus, but if this is true, his last act was to protect Harry. And Elizabeth and I were talking in the lead up to this episode, and we have stunningly different opinions on this whole scenario. So, Elizabeth, you are the guest.
So I get to go first?
You get to go first.
Well, I've never read it this way before, but since I'm doing a more critical thinking this time because of the podcast, Lupin, what he just said, has some speculation in it. He said, if the rumors are true, then he was tortured, and if that's the case, then he didn't give you up, Harry, he saved you. I want to argue that maybe Rufus did reveal that Harry was at the Weasley's house, and we know that he would know that because he was the one who delivered Albus Dumbledore's will. I think the only reason why the Death Eaters did not capture Harry was because Rufus was not aware that Harry was under the disguise of Polyjuice Potion, so they wouldn't have known which guest was him. So while Rufus is a Auror and a strong military person and all that stuff, I think that knowing that he was about to die, that last torture, it must have just been too much, and maybe he did reveal where Harry is.
So I naturally disagree. So you mentioned he's an Auror. He was the head of magical law enforcement. He is now was the man. He was the Minister of Magic. Mm-hmm. And as far as we know, all we know about Rufus is he has tried to fight the fight against Voldy from the get-go after taking over from Fudge. And he's disagreed with Albus on how to go about doing that.
Yeah.
He's disagreed with Harry about how to go about doing that. But generally, their sides are aligned. They do not want Voldy to take power. And Voldy himself, in Chapter 1 of this very book, Deathly Hallows, set a target on Rufus's head by saying, we can't succeed in our goals with him still as Minister of Magic. Mm-hmm. Literally, Voldy marked him as maybe not an equal, but pretty darn close to a target.
Well, definitely someone on the hit list that's
as high
towards
as
the
Harry.
top.
Like, it's Harry and Rufus, and then pretty much everybody else, as far as what Voldy wants to accomplish, with Dumbledore gone.
Right.
So, I view it as when they ambush Rufus, and they're trying to torture the information out of him, he knows he's surrounded on all sides. I mean, literally in that moment. But he knows also when he's back at the Ministry, he's becoming surrounded on all sides. I think he views it as his...
Like last stance?
His last stance, and the way he can get a W. He can get a win by not giving them what they want.
I don't know. I could see that. I think also just like... What struck me this time with it is that Kingsley sent his Patronus within seconds of him sending it. I mean, within seconds of the ministry falling is when he sent it. And then within seconds of that, they all show up at the party, at the wedding, and then chaos. So I would imagine it as he's being tortured. He gives help Harry accidentally. I don't think he would do it on purpose. I think it was just got tortured out of him or some magical way of like figuring out where he was. And then he gets killed. Ministry falls. Let's go after Harry immediately. We go straight to the Burrow because that's where he was last known to be. And then we go to all the other houses and check to see those houses and see if he's there or not.
I think his last words were, I think, poignant to Harry, where we ought to be doing this together. We ought to be coming together on this. We want the same thing. Why can't we come together on it? And 2, yes, he's been antagonistic towards Harry. I think we can all acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean he hates Harry.
No, I don't think he hates Harry.
And it doesn't mean he wants Harry to die. If he spent an entire lifetime fighting dark wizards, he wants Voldemort defeated. If Harry truly is the chosen one, as everybody assumes, as the strong hint he got from Dumbledore, as this kid's the chosen one, I think Rufus would want to see him succeed.
Yeah.
In the end.
I could see it also as Rufus thinking, like, I need to be alive in order to protect the ministry and to protect the wizarding world. And while I don't want to give up the information about Harry, I mean, as strong as a man as he is, if you're being tortured, everyone has their limits. So I could see it as he was pushed to his limit, and they said something about, like, oh, you give him up and we'll keep you alive, whatever. And then it's, oh, just kidding, we're not, you're dead. And then everything falls apart anyway.
I'm going to choose to believe Lupin as a first-person account when he says they didn't know you were there. Which would then imply that Rufus, in fact, did not give up, that you happen to be at the Burrow.
Yeah.
And there's other information, and we'll move on in the chapter because we get more information about this. They obviously searched the Burrow at that time fairly thoroughly. They did find the ghoul. They didn't
let's stay away from it.
They didn't get too close to said ghoul. But they did interrogate all of the remaining guests for hours, which I can't imagine that was super comfortable.
They said there weren't any deaths, but they were checking all the other order houses. Tonks's family was tortured with Crucio, and Diggle's house was burned down. But
obviously Diggle was not present because he's with the Dursleys.
It is interesting that they went after order members who have both helped Harry so far this book, because I mean Diggle helped with the Dursleys and Tonks was the house that Harry went to.
Well, we know those names. It's not fun to throw out Auntie Muriel's place, which was, by the way, a location.
Another place, yeah.
But I mean, no one really.
No one wants to go by Muriel's place. She's 100 and how old now? Like, don't want to deal with her.
So I think his name's to catch our attention.
Yeah.
No deaths were reported. Just some
light torture,
vandalism, some torture, some uncomfortable moments, let's say. Lupin does go on to say, and this is where we talked about some ministry officials being with the Death Eaters on arrival. The Death Eaters now have the full force of the Ministry of Magic on their side now, which then gives them power to perform brutal spells without fear.
Yeah, they won't have to fear being identified or arrested. Like, you can just basically do whatever the heck you want.
That's not it. Guess what?
News gets worse.
It just keeps getting worse. So, we get the Daily Prophet. Lupin references the Daily Prophet.
Which, by now, you would think Harry would just be like, get a little twinge every time he hears the Daily Prophet, because I feel like it has been such a touchy subject for him over his past 6 years.
The Daily Prophet's in it. Let's just take a side tangent on the Daily Prophet for a second. The Daily Prophet's interesting. Is it this is a genuine question that I'm coming up with off the top of my head.
Okay.
Is the Daily Prophet free of government control? Like, is there a barrier between the government and the press?
Like an individual owner?
Like, the press has a freedom to report on what they need to report on? Mm-hmm. Or is it government controlled? Or, the other side of this, is the controlling body of government so strong and so imposing that they muscle the media?
I could see it as being the second one. Because, I mean, like Rita said how, I mean, back in book 5, how the government leaned heavily on the prophet to take a certain angle with their stories.
So it's not formally like the same thing. The prophet is not the Ministry of Magic. The Ministry of Magic is not the prophet.
Right.
But
they can influence what kind of stories come out, probably.
Okay. All right.
I'm sure some money has been exchanged in that process.
Well, I don't know that any money's been exchanged. I think it's
I think it's like there's some bribing going on.
Maybe. However, that's not the bribe that we're talking about in this chapter.
No.
Surprisingly, we're talking about government, and the bribe really doesn't come directly from the government. Go figure. But I did say directly, a little bit indirectly.
A little indirectly.
But anyway, let's continue on with the prophet. So let's have that frame of mind with the prophet as we go forward. But we find out that, one, Harry Potter is wanted for questioning about the death of Albus Dumbledore.
I like how both Ron and Hermione are like, oh my god, that's the worst, and they react so strongly, and Harry is just kind of numb to it. He's like, of course.
Yeah, that tracks.
Of course I'm being accused of this, yes.
Well, that makes sense.
Let's keep going.
I'm the only one that witnessed it that wasn't a Death Eater on the tower.
Yeah, and I'm always like the scapegoat for everything anyway, so I'm either the scapegoat or I'm the hero. There's no in between, so
nope,
of course,
I can't just be a kid.
No.
Welcome to the Harry Potter book series.
It's almost like you're the protagonist.
Yeah. So Lupin does have another great quote here, though. Lupin has a couple of really good quotes in this chapter, but here's another one. Quote, "The coup has been smooth and virtually silent." Because all of these imperious charms have been placed, obviously, covertly, and the story about Rufus is that he resigned.
Yeah.
No one knows that he was assassinated, essentially.
Yeah.
So the rumor they're putting out about that is, he just resigned and is in hiding. Not that he was killed. So it's a silent kind of...
It's a very poignant quote, because I do think a lot of times when people think of coups, especially like political ones, that there's a lot of fanfare, there's a lot of bloodshed and death and that kind of stuff. But you can have these quiet, slick, sly coups that have been in the process for many years, where it's just arranging all of the foundation so that it works in your favor, and then you do that final little takeover, and then it's, oh shoot, we can't fix this, we can't go back.
Yep.
Scary.
So Ron, the idea that Rufus is now eliminated and Voldy has not named himself Minister of Magic is like, why?
Yeah, he named Pious Thickness as the minister, even though we know he's under the Imperious Curse.
Correct. So Lupin laughs at that idea of Voldy becoming the Minister of Magic and is like, no, Pious will run the day-to-day, the business of running a government, running a country, while Voldy will extend his powers beyond the Ministry of Magic.
Which is really smart, because he said, if Voldemort had declared himself Minister of Magic, it would create a rebellion, just open rebellion. But instead, by having someone else do the job, he can just sit on the sidelines and direct traffic, basically. But he creates that confusion, uncertainty, and fear, and people won't feel the confidence to strike back. Yeah,
so that confusion and fear that he's creating, Hermione and Ron chip in with, aren't people seeing what's going on? Because Lupin at one point says the change in policy from the Rufus Scrimgeour administration to the Pious administration, there are some real dramatic changes, which we'll get to one of those here in a second.
Yeah, and I mean, we know, when policies are changed, it becomes maddening to be don't people see what's happening? Don't they know? Don't they recognize how bad this is? And it's just like, well, there's nothing you can do. It keeps going.
Well, Lupin says people are whispering about it, but they're whispering.
Yeah.
No one's openly challenging anything because they literally fear.
Yeah.
Well, fear is always coupled. It's fear and mistrust. They're fearful because they don't know who they can trust to even tell about this.
And you can't trust the government because that's the Death Eaters.
And that's the trick that Voldy has done here by not declaring himself. You don't know who is on your side and who is not. And if you pick wrong,
you're dead.
You're in a whole world of hurt. So it's created a very, and this is, we've talked about it before in the first Wizarding War, like with Peter and some of the decisions that he made, and just other adults. Like, you get the hints when Sirius would talk about it, or when Lupin would talk about it, or whatever, and you get these hints of like, it was dark.
Yeah.
Like, it was dark. You didn't have a lot of hope. And even the best witches and wizards were, like, legitimately afraid.
Yeah.
And that's what we're creeping in on here.
Yeah. It's not a happy time.
Not a happy time. Lupin also says it was a masterstroke. That's a direct quote. A masterstroke by Voldy to turn people against Harry. Because not only is there a price on Harry's head, which has been set, but now Voldy is starting to sow doubt and fear in even potential allies. People that would, outside of the Order of the Phoenix, that would sympathize or empathize with Harry.
Yeah.
Or at least just dislike Voldy. They would be now thinking twice about helping Harry Potter.
Well, if you see that misinformation repeated enough and the evidence like twisted in a way to support that misinformation, then yeah, it's easy to get brainwashed.
So we get to one of these major changes in policy. And the first one enacted and being carried out currently is the Muggle-born Registration Commission. And the purpose of this commission is to better understand how they came to possess magical powers.
Yes.
And the idea being, if you're Muggle-born and you're magic, you clearly stole this magical ability from a witch or wizard.
Which they have an interesting way of bringing this about, because they said how it's the Department of Mysteries has been studying this and saying that like magic is only transferred through having an ancestor of magical powers. So if you were a Muggle-born, then clearly you stole it somehow. But having it come from the Department of Mysteries, which no one knows about except the Unspeakables, who can't speak about their job to like counter it, it's like, it's the perfect little like loophole of misinformation that no one's going to argue with, because how could you?
It's a closed loop. No one can have an easy way of cracking this lie.
Yeah, because you can't go and prove it.
And I know Lupin called the previous move a masterstroke by Voldy. This is another masterstroke. Utilizing the Department of Mysteries to misinform constituents. To misinform just people. I'm not going to call people of the United Kingdom constituents of Voldy, because that's ridiculous. But yeah, it's a really interesting strategy. I wonder who came up with it. I wonder if it's Voldy doing this. I wonder if it's Pius and his political expertise doing this, or I wonder if it's Yaxley, because Yaxley, remember, is the one that put the Imperius Curse on Pius.
Yeah.
He was so proud of it at that meeting.
Yeah.
So I wonder which one's like pulling those political strings. The racism is blatant and has been there for a long time, but the actual implementation of actual political policy to carry out said racism, I wonder who had the political savvy
to do it
in this fashion.
Yeah.
Because Voldy, while he might be smart enough to do this,
he's not a politician.
And I don't think that's where his passion lies.
Yeah.
So there, I have to think it's either Pius or Yaxley via Pius.
What I do like, though, immediately Ron points out the most obvious fact that could disprove this whole thing, of that squibs exist. If there's a non-magical person who can just steal magic, then any squib who was born into a magical family should just be able to steal magic, and then just be like, look at me. I'm a witch. I'm a wizard, you know?
Right.
Doesn't work that way.
Lupin points out, like, yes, Ron, you're technically accurate. That is an astute observation. However, no one cares.
Yeah.
Like, they don't care.
You can't put logic to this kind of situation because we're not paying attention to logic. We're brainwashing people.
Right.
And the people who could know that technically you're right don't care because we're promoting this racism and that's our main goal. So that's what we're going to do.
Ron then looks to Hermione and appeals to her and is like, I will teach you every member of my family. We will just assimilate you into the Weasley family. And Hermione, and they grasp hands. And Hermione looks at Ron and is like, Ron, that I really appreciate the sentiment. I do. We're on the run with the most wanted person in the country. I don't think that's going to matter.
Also, I don't have red hair, so...
Well, there's that too. I'm sure they could do a color change spell.
It is a cute moment, though.
It is a great moment it's a great Ron and Hermione moment, for sure. But we're going to transition to a darker moment for Hogwarts. Lupin also informs the trio that attendance has now been made mandatory for Hogwarts, which is, interestingly noted, a change from before. Families always had the option of homeschooling or sending their children abroad to another wizarding school, which I find that fascinating for a couple of different things. I know we've
Dan likes to travel.
Yes, but we've talked about other wizarding schools around the world and how that works population based wise, and all that kind of stuff. So interesting.
I mean, he just wants to keep an eye on the kids, make sure he's able to brainwash them with whatever propaganda they can promote at school. And then also they said they're going to be checking the blood status of every student. So if they do happen to be Muggle born, guess who's not going to school this year?
You're probably going to a much worse place.
Yes, you probably are.
And Harry feels appropriately sickened by this news of what has happened to a place that he holds so dear to him.
Right.
With the news of what's happening at Hogwarts and with the news of the Muggle-born Registration Commission, you know, the question has to be said. Like, I know a lot of people had issues with the Ministry of Magic and how Fudge ran the Ministry of Magic and how Rufus ran the Ministry of Magic. And while they ran the Ministry of Magic differently, there are some similarities in how they ran it. It's still a political organization. They're both politicians. One might be a little bit more aggressive and assertive than the other. One might be a little bit more...
bumbling?
I would say more maybe charismatic.
Okay.
Where he's more like the charismatic leader, where Rufus is more like the let's get stuff done.
Yeah, I can see that.
kind of guy, you know what I mean? Again, both politicians, but whatever. And that comes with negatives inherently. Yes, the government wasn't perfect. There were a lot of issues there. The wizarding world was not perfect. They had a lot of things to address and get better at. I think we can both agree on that. I think everybody listening to this podcast can agree that the Ministry of Magic was not running at peak performance or peak efficiency. That being said, what do we have now? We have blatant rounding up of individuals based on characteristics that the government has deemed valuable or invaluable. And we're getting to a place that's a very authoritarian, very scary government. Because now you're just not maybe unintentionally, intentionally discriminating against a group of people like goblins or house elves or something like that, where it's like, okay, we're not really like persecuting you, but we're also not treating you the best. You know, now it's straight persecution. Now you are being singled out, judged, and harshly dealt with. It's not just ignoring you kind of thing. Now we're very much not ignoring you. We are taking care of you.
Yeah.
And it's a scary environment. People are fleeing the country because of this. People feel threatened because of this. It's a different type of government. And my whole point in me defending Rufus and me defending the Ministry of Magic to an extent is, oh, it can be worse. Oh, it can be much worse. And you're flirting with it because you're in a war.
Yeah.
It's not like, some far-flung thing that's like, whatever, ha ha ha, it might not happen, whatever.
I don't disagree with what you say. I still do think, though, that, like, while Rufus was a different kind of ruler than Fudge was, by a lot of different ways, I don't think that replacing one minister with another necessarily changes the whole foundation of the ministry.
Sure.
And I think that this was not avoidable. I think the foundation has been built too deeply with the racism and, like, I mean, the status of your blood being so important to pay attention to. And Voldemort, we know, is a master of being deceptive and making people question loyalties to other people and, like, question love and friendship and that kind of stuff. So, like, even if the strongest leader in the world had been put into place, I still think Voldemort, this would have been the outcome.
I think if you're the Order of the Phoenix and you're Albus Dumbledore, and this is what he was trying to do at the end of Goblet of Fire when he petitioned Fudge, Voldemort is back. Mm-hmm. We need to move. We need to act now, and we need to be together on this.
We have to learn from our mistakes last time.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Fudge said no. And that's... Look, if you're coming at me on Fudge, don't, because I'm not supporting that.
Do you think Rufus would have said yes?
Yes. I think he wanted to. Where they differed...
But at that point in time, do you think if...
100%.
Yeah?
100%. The difference between Albus and Rufus, I think the thing that caused the friction there is how Harry fits in. Mm-hmm. And Albus wanted Harry to go off on the Horcrux route, which, for the record, once again, fine. Keep that from Rufus. He should not know about that. Mm-hmm. What I'm talking about is you can't withhold important information on dangerous individuals moving about the country that you know about from the head of government. Because once things get too far, you're now behind.
I still don't think we necessarily have evidence that he did withhold that information. I think
Rufus says he can't get a hold of Albus.
Yeah, but I think it was mostly in regards to Harry that he was complaining that I can't get to Harry through Dumbledore. And I think that's probably why Dumbledore stopped having those conversations, because he's like, all you're going to do is bring up wanting to use Harry. I already shut that door on you, and you aren't satisfied with that.
I think we get so the only plot point we see in this is the Harry thing. Mm-hmm. And I think we get caught up in that. If we're looking at the practical side of waging a war against, for lack of a better term, like a shadow state, like they're not like a formalized army, right. They're like operating in the shadows.
Right.
If you're fighting a war against that, there's a lot of other conversations that have to be had beyond just Harry Potter. There's giants involved. There are werewolves involved. There are other dark forces. There are Dementors involved. There's breakouts from Azkaban that are happening. They came together. The Ministry and the Order came together to provide protections on all of these Order residences. Mm-hmm. Right? And they were so powerful that not even Voldy himself
until the Ministry fell.
That there should tell you, together, we are strong.
But I still don't think that there's evidence that Dumbledore wasn't sharing those bits and pieces of information to make the government stronger. I mean, like, they talked about in those pamphlets, like, hey, there's evidence he might use Infuri. You should probably know what those are and how to interact with them. Hey, here are the tactics that we know he used last time. Here's ways you can combat them. Like, we know that Lupin is with the werewolves, and I'm sure he's reporting stuff that Dumbledore would have then told them. But I think also there was the prejudices of, like, against werewolves or against giants. I think when Fudge was still in office, like, knowing how Dumbledore sent Lupin to the werewolves or Hagrid to go see the giants, like, they weren't okay with that. I don't know. I would assume Rufus would have been more open to the idea, but I still think there's the political game that they were playing since Voldemort hadn't openly like shown his existence yet. So for them, it's like, okay, you're saying there's this really dangerous man out there. Okay, but since I don't have full-blown evidence yet that he's out there, I still have the numbers of the public to deal with and to keep them happy.
That was more Fudge than Rufus.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that, like, if Rufus had been in charge instead of Fudge, this would be a very different story. But I don't think there's evidence that Dumbledore was purposely withholding any information except the Harry stuff. And I think Rufus was just so obsessed with doing the Harry stuff because he wanted to make the transition of trust the Ministry as fast as possible, since, like, the Ministry had been downplaying the existence of Voldemort for a year.
So when you mistrust the government, that, we're talking about sowing doubt in potential Harry allies. That's what Voldy wants to do.
Right.
Sow doubt.
Right.
If you doubt any of your potential allies, I win. Because now I've divided you.
Right.
And it's way easier to take out one of you than two of you.
Right.
So by mistrusting the government, however flawed that government may be, there's a worse option. And now we're here. Mm-hmm. Like, one of them has fallen. You had the Order, and you had the Ministry of Magic. The Order has remained intact. The Ministry has now fallen. What happens as soon as the Ministry falls? Every one of your allies just got attacked.
Yeah, but if your point is that if they had joined together, this wouldn't have happened.
No, I will give you that. I will give you that. You can't guarantee the Ministry doesn't fall at some point, because Voldy is a very effective leader, however you want to, phrase that. He is.
And there's more people in the Ministry, so that raises the chances of people being pro-Voldemort.
I will give you that the Ministry still could have fallen even if they combine their forces. Mm-hmm. My only rebuttal would be it might have taken longer, and it might have taken way more of an effort to do so. And if it takes longer and you hold out longer, there's a lot of variability in that. I guess my overall thought is this new government, this new Ministry of Magic is a problem.
Very much so.
For everybody.
Yeah.
And it's not just like an inconvenient problem. It's like people are going to suffer under this regime.
Which I also want to point out the fact that education is one of the first things that he's attacking. You change what is considered a fact. And if you don't know because the information isn't readily accessible or taught to you, then you create generations who are used to the truth that you provide, and then there's nothing to contradict it. It's very dangerous.
We can have an entire hour-long episode on just this topic. We can have an entire hour-long episode on how the politics in Harry Potter can mirror real-world politics.
In so many different ways. Maybe after we're done, maybe we have that conversation. Who knows? But for right now, we still got a lot of chapter left. Yeah, Lupin's not done yet.
Lupin is not done yet. So we are going to continue on. Lupin makes an attempt to join the trio on their mission. He says, look, the Order is aware that Dumbledore has left you a mission.
Yeah, it's not a closed secret.
You don't even have to tell me the details on this mission. But let me join you as an adult wizard who has, modestly speaking, some skills that you might be able to utilize.
Yeah, consider me your personal protection.
Kinda. And
Harry's tempted by it.
Harry does note, tempting offer.
Yeah.
But Hermione steps in and says, well, that's great, but what about Tonks? How does that work?
And this is where the chapter for me goes from, okay, to, oh, I hate this. I hate this so much. I hate it so much.
If you thought we were done talking, guess what?
It makes me cringe.
Both Elizabeth and I have a lot to say still.
Oh, God.
So buckle in. So Lupin reveals some news to us. He reveals that Tonks is pregnant. And he does so, though, not in a joyful tone.
No, it's like the most disheartening way possible to share that fact.
As soon as Hermione brings up Tonks, his tone changes from generally conversational to a little bit down and a little bit cold.
And his body language, too, is very closed off.
Lupin gives another pitch. Instead of addressing those questions, he gives another pitch. He's like, hey, look, we're going to be facing magic that most of us have never encountered before. Or even imagined before. Like, this is going to be unprecedented magic that all of us are going to be facing. I really think you need someone of my skill set. And Lupin even goes so far as to invoke James. He says James would want him to protect Harry. This is where Harry gets upset. Harry did not like that.
Which he should have seen coming.
Harry says, I'm pretty sure my father would have wanted to know why you aren't sticking with your own kid. Lupin tries to explain. He tries to get an explanation out there. I think, before we get into a discussion, I think you and I, Elizabeth, can agree this was not worded particularly well. So I'll read you the exact quote, but I am pretty sure Elizabeth and I agree, yes?
Wording can be so much better.
Wording could be better. Okay, here's the quote. It's going to be a fairly lengthy quote, so and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Quote, I made a grave mistake in marrying Tonks. I did it against my better judgment, and I have regretted it very much ever since.
Yeah, it's that line that makes me go, oh.
So at this point, Harry jumps in and says, so you're just going to dump her and the kid and run off with us. At this point, Lupin gets upset. Lupin is not happy.
Yeah.
At this point. He takes offense to Harry saying that. And his response is, quote, don't you understand what I've done to my wife and my unborn child? I should never have married her. I've made her an outcast. He goes on to say, you have only ever seen me amongst the Order or under Dumbledore's protection at Hogwarts. You don't know how most of the wizarding world sees creatures like me. When they know of my affliction, they can barely talk to me. Don't you see what I have done? Even her own family is disgusted by our marriage. What parents want their only daughter to marry a werewolf? And the child. The child. So
I hate it.
Okay. There's a lot going on here. He's obviously worried about the baby. He doesn't know. He says, and let's just make this very clear. Lupin, as far as we're aware, is one of the foremost experts on werewolves. He himself is one.
Right.
And he's not a dumb man. He's a very educated individual. You can presume he's done some research on his affliction.
And he's been very proactive with trying to protect other people. I mean, like...
Correct. So he knows a lot about werewolves, and he says, well, werewolves don't normally tend to breed.
Right.
I have no idea what is going to happen to this child.
Right.
And let's say even if nothing happens to the child, he still has a father that's a werewolf and basically shunned from society. And Elizabeth, not even from just general wizarding society, let's remember, he's not well liked amongst the werewolves either.
Right.
So he really has particularly
nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So everybody hates him because he's a werewolf. The werewolves hate him because he tried to be somebody.
I get where Lupin is coming from, because it is certainly an emotional thought to think that you have screwed over your future offspring and your wife. And it is because of your affliction that you have zero control over that their lives have now been ruined forever. On the flip side of things, though, Tonks is a grown woman. She knows what she did. She accepted him, chose to marry him, said the vows and all that. And obviously they consented to have a child. We don't know what this kid is going to turn out to be. He could turn out into be a werewolf, in which case you deal with it when it comes. It might be totally fine, in which case you deal with it when it comes. And it's a little I don't want to say selfish, that's not the right word, but for Lupin to be making these assumptions of how his kid is definitely not going to love him because of his affliction, and his kid would be better off without him, is like, who are you to be making those judgments? You know, like the kid might want a father around. It might be that you would be the perfect dad. It might be that you are able to, let's say he does come out as a werewolf. Maybe you're able to help him through that transition in a way that Tonks never could. So to be making these statements, I get that his wording is terrible and it's because he's in such an emotional state. It does still come across as so bad of being like, well, I regret marrying her. Like, okay, be better.
Before I say everything I'm about to say, I want to make very clear, absolutely 100% crystal clear, I do not support Lupin leaving
Abandoning
Tonks
his spouse
and his unborn child. I do not support that, for the record. Now, Lupin is in a very dark place. He's got a lot of insecurity there. He's got a lot of depression there, based a lot on stuff that's going on with him. And now, you know, look, I think everybody has feelings of depression from time to time, whether it's like a clinically diagnosed like issue, or whether it's just momentary lapses into some depressive state. So everybody has a little bit of it. And I think for those that do, they know that if they think they're harming someone they care about or someone they love,
they try to isolate.
And it's that much worse. It only compounds the depression.
Right.
And you make, I'm not going to say worse and worse choices, but you make more self-harming choices, potentially. And he's in this rut that Lupin, as much of a counselor, as much as a helper, and as much of a guide as Lupin has been to Harry, Lupin needs that for himself. Lupin needs, he needs two things. He needs a therapist.
Yeah.
But the problem is, clearly, as we've discussed many times, does not exist in this
And
world.
even if it did, I don't think they'd have werewolf therapists available for him.
Well, you'd hope in the magical world they would have some. But that goes to my next point of the other thing he needs is like a doctor.
Yeah.
Like an actual doctor who specializes in this type of thing, except that doesn't seem to exist either because, like I said, for all we know, Lupin might be the foremost expert on this in the world that we know of, or at least in this region of the world. So that's issues. And some of his worries, I think, are actually coming from a very valid place. He doesn't.
No, I totally.
He doesn't
I get
know
what's going to happen.
A werewolf-bred baby could do, and we're
because my mind is my mind. I'm just imagining like little werewolf fetus, just like
but
tearing her up from the inside, kind of.
I know you're joking, but I think
it could be a thing.
I think it's a valid fear for him.
Yeah, it could be.
I mean, if at some point in the lunar cycle, there's a full moon, and there's a fully formed fetus, what if it does turn and then
attacks?
Tonks has real birth complications or real health problems, and no one's even willing to work on them because they're werewolves. Or there's so many things that could potentially go wrong, and he doesn't know. And when you don't know something,
you freak out.
And especially if a really smart person doesn't know something, that freaks them out even more. They're like, I know this, but I don't know this. And that bothers them.
And I think it's safe to assume that him and Tonks have had this conversation. I think Tonks is such a optimist in general that she's kind of more like, we'll worry about it when we get there. It might not even happen, so why worry about things that haven't happened yet? I think Lupin tends to be more pessimistic, but also a realist, and thinking that these are potential things, we should be considering them, we should be worrying about them, makes sense to me. And I get his desire to keep Tonks safe by being away from her. And I get the desire to help the trio because, yeah, like if we want a safe world for this kid, if he does survive childbirth and all that, then we need to take down Voldemort as fast as possible. And it is true that, like, he is an expert. He'd be great to have with them as they go search for the Horcruxes. But knowing that he's approaching this from an emotional state instead of a logical state is, I think, the big mistake here.
Now, not to jump ahead a little bit, but as we just said, Lupin needs like a real professional to help him through this process of insecurity and depression and the unknown that he's facing. Spoiler alert, Harry is not that therapist. But Harry is not here for this. Okay?
No, he is not.
He does not want to hear it.
And Harry has a temper, as we know.
As we know, Harry gets a little all into himself from time to time, and he loves telling people what to think and feel. He really enjoys that. For whatever reason, he's a fan of it. So he's like, well, you shouldn't worry about your child being ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of you.
Yeah, he calls him a coward.
I'm ashamed of you because you think you're trying to fill Sirius's shoes and coming along with us on an adventure, which Lupin does not take kindly to, shockingly. And he says, I can't believe the man who taught me how to make a Patronus is a coward.
Mm-hmm. And we know none of the Marauders enjoy being called a coward.
No.
Even though it does apply to at least one of them, but not this one.
Well, and the word coward, if we could just break down briefly before we get to how Lupin responds to this. Mm-hmm. Calling Lupin a coward. One, I think there's a bunch of examples of proof of why he's not. Mm-hmm. I mean, the job he's doing currently right now for the Order of the Phoenix, being a spy amongst the werewolves, that is not a lighthearted job. That's hard. Mm-hmm. The fact that he's usually one of the first people into a fight would also prove it. There's a lot of reasons why he's not a coward. In this particular, if we just stick to what Harry has heard here, and not all of the other reasons why Lupin should not be considered a coward, Harry doesn't deal well with mental health. You just ignored all of Lupin's fears, insecurities, and I think valid worries. Mm-hmm. You ignore all that and call him a coward. Like, whether you agree or disagree with everything he just said, that's fine, and that's an opinion that you're allowed to have. Starting to question his character when he's not in a good mental state, you're playing a dangerous game, is what I'm saying.
Well, I also think part of it is, like, Harry is viewing this as pure abandonment, and Lupin is viewing it as protection.
Lupin is viewing it as, I can't say child anymore, because now technically Harry is 17 and an adult in this world, but he's viewing it as, Harry, this is complicated. Like, you're not understanding just the full complexity and a lot of gray area in this situation. Like, there's a lot going on here. He tries to call him out for it by, like, Harry, you've only seen me amongst people that like me.
Right.
You realize that's, like, a very small fraction of the actual people in this world, right? Like, most of everybody
they judge
hates
me before they even, like, know
they
me.
despise me.
Yeah.
Like, I can't forget, like, just having the child. I can't provide for my wife and child because I can't get a job. Mm-hmm. You don't understand what I'm facing.
But again, that's why I think it's like Harry is like, you are abandoning your wife, you're abandoning your child. And for him, knowing his history of growing up without parents, it hits hard.
Sure.
For Lupin, it's, I'm not abandoning them. I plan to go back, sure. But I think my uses would be better put towards protection. I mean, too, like, he can't possibly still be with the werewolves right now. Like, Dumbledore isn't around to give him those orders anymore. And by now I would assume that the werewolves are, like, they know what he's up to.
I suppose in defense of Harry here, like we started this whole conversation with, Lupin does use some poor word choices.
It's so bad.
Where Lupin says, he regretted marrying Tonks very much.
Yeah. That's harsh.
We do know that, Lupin is being honest here because he said, look, I had reservations before we even got married.
Yeah.
I was not a huge fan of the idea from the get-go.
If he hadn't said, I regret marrying her, if he had said something like, I put her in danger by marrying her, I think that would have softened the blow a little bit.
Yeah.
But being like, I regret it.
It's harsh.
It just makes us be like, I'm done with her.
It's very abrasive. It's very harsh.
Yes, it's bad.
Well, you know what else is abrasive and harsh? Lupin's response.
Yes.
Lupin draws his wand so quickly, Harry can't even reach for his.
Yeah.
And Harry gets blasted backward.
Yeah.
And then Lupin leaves Grimmauld Place.
Which in itself, I can't even imagine attacking one of my previous students. Because to me, they're still my kids, So, like, even if they insulted me this badly, I don't know if I'd be able to throw a punch or, like, anything. I don't know.
Again, Lupin is not in a great state to begin with.
No, he's not.
And, yeah, this is not...
The problem is he just hit the trigger that Harry has of parents.
Well, they both hit each other's triggers.
Yeah.
And when you do that and you're in an emotionally compromised state, literal fireworks. But I do want to note, Harry tends to have a knack of angering people that generally want to help him. Mm-hmm. He did it with Rufus by continuously going back and forth with Rufus, and now he's doing it with Remus. He likes to make adults who want to help angry. But
sometimes that bluntness does put people in their place, and it does remind them of, like, how they're coming across. But you're right. Like, you got to be careful with your words in emotional situations. If you know you're getting triggered, then take a deep breath, pause the conversation, then go back to it.
Well, Hermione and Ron both acknowledge that, Harry, you went a little too far. Like, that was too much.
I can also just imagine this happened so quickly that both of them were probably like, wait, what? And then it was just done. And it was like, I didn't even have a chance to, like, tell them to calm down or butt in or give it 2 cents.
It's like, we've talked about a roller coaster. Uh-huh. And I feel like this chapter is a little roller coaster where you're like, up and down and up and down.
Yeah, you're happy to see him. And then you're like, wait a second.
And it goes so quickly and you're just caught by the whiplash of it. Like, you're stunned by the news that you're actually hearing, and then you're stunned by each individual in the argument.
Yeah, their behavior
getting more and more aggressive.
Yeah.
But both Ron and Hermione are like, dude, it's too much. You shouldn't have called him a coward.
But she does acknowledge, and it says that he says a little bit with, like, almost pleading with them. I only said it because parents shouldn't leave their kids unless they've got to, and I know I shouldn't have called him a coward, but it'll be worthwhile if he stays with Tonks, right? Please tell me, yes, that's how it will work out, because if my words, like, ruined my relationship with him, at least his marriage will be saved.
He says he feels that sickening urge of remorse of, man, I really shouldn't have said those things.
Yeah. To not just my previous teacher, but my dad's friend.
Yeah.
Very good friend.
And I know, like, Lupin was coming here to protect me because he wants to protect me.
Yeah.
He wants to help me on my mission, on my journey. He also mentions that as he's turning away from Ron and Hermione, he can just feel them sharing a look of...
What did we just witness?
What did we witness? And, dude, Harry's
on edge.
Harry was too much. Before we move on, where would you land on the with James? Where would James land on this, Lupin or Harry?
I think Harry's side. I think he would also agree that parents should protect their kids, given how he died protecting his kid. Obviously he wants Harry to succeed and, be alive, but if Tonks weren't pregnant, then maybe he'd be more with Lupin's side, maybe. as long as Tonks also agrees that it's okay for him to go off and help Harry. But with a future kid in the picture, I think it's your priorities have to switch. Protect your family.
Yeah, I think it's, once again, I'm going to go a little bit more gray area. Because I think he would feel a little conflicted, because that's, human nature. Mm-hmm. Human nature is you want to protect your kid. Mm-hmm. And if one of your best friends who you trust implicitly, you trust wholly, is offering to protect your child, and he's capable of doing so, I'm going to bet a part of you wants him to do that.
Yeah.
But obviously, I do agree that I think James would be like, well, you do have your own child to protect. And
plus, if anything were to happen to Tonks and that kid and Lupin wasn't there to protect them,
that's a real regret that you're going to have.
That will haunt you. Yeah.
Right. So it's Harry's turn to actually peruse the prophet. And he notices a picture of Albus's family. Mm-hmm. And the picture does offer some descriptions. We get Percival, the father, who is noted as generally good looking. Ariana is a relatively small baby. You get Kendra, the mother, with a particularly carved face, looking relatively stoic. Mm-hmm. And you get Albus and Aberforth, looking quite similar, as Albus is maybe a couple of years older.
And he has no broken nose yet.
Oh, and no glasses.
Yep.
So the young Albus and Aberforth. Mm-hmm. It is accompanied by an exclusive extract from Albus's biography, which, generally speaking, is Bethelda talking about the Dumbledore's life in Godric's Hollow.
Which we know this is the biography being Rita Skeeter's book. And it's not a very long clip, though. It basically just says how after Percival was arrested, Kendra moved her whole family to Godric's Hollow. She was very antisocial. Matilda said she only saw Ariana out at midnight once when she was barely 7 years old, which the assumption then was clearly Ariana is a squib, because by 7 years old, that should be about when magic starts to present itself. So if it hasn't yet, then we got some questions going on. So the fact that Ariana was always kept hidden away, she just assumed, well, clearly the Dumbledores are ashamed to have a squib in the family. So there was the rumors that she's being kept in the dungeons in the basement of the house and locked away, which is very upsetting to Harry, of course.
Yeah, he's not liking all of this darker side of Albus Dumbledore talk.
Yeah.
He's not loving it.
Yeah.
But if you think we're done with this chapter, we're not.
We haven't even gotten
to the actual chapter title?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Harry has finally forgotten. He's finally forgotten about Kreacher and the search for Mundungus. And then, crack! Kreacher appears with Mundungus Fletcher.
I love that Hermione this time is the one to use Expelliarmus, and then Ron tackles Mundungus to the ground because he tried to make a run for the door, and then Harry pointed his wand directly in his face, so close that Mundungus is getting cross-eyed just looking at the tip of it.
It makes me think about, do wizards and witches have a self-defense class where they work on disarming without a wand?
It would be smart, too.
Because if Harry's got his wand so close to you, to your face, couldn't you, practically, physically disarm?
I mean, I feel like lesson 101, not even 101, before 101, would have been keep your wand on you at all times. Don't lose your wand. Don't let anyone touch your wand. Don't set down your wand. I would want that thing glued in my hand.
But in cases like this where you're attacked.
Yeah. But then what do
happens,
you do? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you shouldn't be completely defenseless all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, that could be if it was class 101, then class 102 is what to do if you lose your wand.
Well, Kreacher apologizes for the delay in bringing Mundungus in, because Mundungus has, little holes he can hide in, some accomplices that help him out.
It's been 3 days or so?
Something like that, yeah. So you get a creature apology, and then you get a Mundungus apology.
Ish.
Kind of. And he tries to apologize for leaving during the Seven Potters scene, leading to Moody's downfall, his death. However, he apologizes by offering excuse after excuse after excuse about it.
Yeah, not exactly how you apologize for things.
No, you can tell it's very clearly insincere. Mm-hmm. Luckily for Mundungus, Harry doesn't want to hear about that.
Yeah.
Nor does he want to hear about Mundungus stealing all of the Black family heirlooms and random silver goblets and plates and such and such and such, which Mundungus tries to apologize for by saying, well, Sirius didn't want it anyway, and you said you didn't want it anyway, so what does it matter? And then all of a sudden, crack again, as Creature knocks Mundungus over the head with a frying pan. And Harry's like, Creature, no.
We need him conscious.
And Creature is like paused, holding the frying pan above his head, shaking at the weight of the frying pan. And Creature says, perhaps just one more, Master Harry, for luck.
I'll even be like, okay, you can be on standby. If we need you again, then yeah. If he acts up, then you can give him another little hit.
So ultimately, they question Mundungus about whether he stole a locket from the Black household. Mm-hmm. He acknowledges he did. Mm-hmm. They're asking him about it. They asked if he sold it to anyone or if he still has it. He says, I gave it away.
Not willingly. But to avoid arrest, then yeah, sure.
There was some ministry official, a hag, yes, some ministry hag that came by and questioned him about selling magical artifacts and does he have a license for that. Mm-hmm. To get out of said situation, he ended up giving the locket to this person as a bribe. Mm-hmm. And that person had the description of a small, toad-like woman wearing a bow. And that's the end of the chapter.
I remember reading this the first time and being like, oh, she's back.
I know.
Dun, dun, dun.
I don't think it's a spoiler to say who this person is because it leads you there. Who
else is a toad with a bow on their head? It's Umbridge.
It's Umbridge.
Even Harry reacts that way, though. He drops his wand and then it sets Mundungus's eyebrows on fire. It's like he's back.
Well, before we get to the spoiler section here, I promised shout-outs.
Oh, yes. Let's hear them.
So the first shout-out comes from Sandhya on Deathly Hallows Chapter 7, The Will of Albus Dumbledore. Sandhya says, as to Harry's antagonism to the Ministry, I agree it makes sense to support Ministry in a way. But their methods happen to be questionable. And they don't really do, quote, the right thing. For example, they still don't seem to treat all creatures equally. They don't extend friendships to giants, werewolves, house elves, goblins. Everything seems political. I think Dumbledore questioned just that to form the Order in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I could see that as reasoning behind forming the Order.
Sure. I agree with everything that Sandhya just said. They are very political. Everything's a political game. I understand that. They don't tend to treat all creatures equally, and they don't extend friendship to giants or goblins or anything of that nature. Certainly not werewolves. My only point and my only contradiction to that is, now you're here.
Yeah.
And if I put the poll question out there as to which government would you want to live under, I'm betting you're going to pick Rufus's Ministry of Magic.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that.
So it's just be careful what you wish for. Oh, you want a change in government. You want a change in administration. Okay, you got one. All of the policies changed dramatically. You're welcome, right? You wanted this, right? Right? Well, okay. Rufus isn't the minister anymore. But no, other than that, I agree with everything. We got another comment here from Robert's Books. And Robert's Books left this comment on our Instagram. So thank you for leaving the comment on the Instagram. I'm thinking, Elizabeth, it's another person agreeing with you. So here we go. Robert's Books says, enjoying your Deathly Hallow episodes.
Yay! Thank you for listening to them.
Thank you. I got to voice an opposing view about Harry versus Scrimgeour. Harry will be in hiding. It's not safe to tell anyone anything. Harry distracts the minister by speaking to him as an equal. Even Hermione approves of this attitude. The minister came at them like an interrogator, then basically said Harry owes the wizarding world. I think Harry's jab about Stan and Umbridge was a powerful statement, telling the minister he has the wrong idea about Harry's role without actually saying, "No, sir, I'm disappearing off to do secret stuff." Just my view.
I do like the idea of how Harry talks to adults like adults, because I think a lot of times they view him as just a silly little child who they have to protect and doesn't really have thoughts and opinions of his own.
Sure.
And I know that because of that, that's why he comes across as so aggressive sometimes with his reactions and whatever. And sometimes the emotions get the best of him, as we just saw with Lupin.
Right.
But I think it is worth reminding these people that, like, hey, I'm not an object. Like, I am a living human being with thoughts and opinions, and I know what's best for myself. I know what I want to do or not want to do, and you can't just treat me as, like, a display feature for your ministry. Like,
No, I get it. I get it. I really, really do understand this take. To your point about talking to adults, to Robert's books and your point about speaking to adults as equals. Mm-hmm. Well, if you remember, I did give him credit for standing up to Rufus and saying, like, hey, what you're doing with Stan might not be the right thing.
yeah.
Like, that's a gutsy thing.
Yeah.
To tell the head of state. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Like, that's a gutsy thing.
Yeah.
My critique of that is he didn't go far enough. Because he could have used that audience with the head of state to really get Umbridge out of the ministry. Because I agree with Robert's books, having Umbridge in your Ministry of Magic is abhorrent. She shouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. It's a crime to have this person employed anywhere and not in Azkaban.
It's funny because I know, like, people say kids say the darndest things. And I think when it's little kids, it's like, oh, it's so cute, whatever. When it's teenagers, I think the impulse is just to be like, well, shut up. You don't really know because you haven't lived long enough yet. You don't have the wisdom that I do. And I think people forget that teenagers are not necessarily, like, as clueless as you think they are. Like,
right.
They do have intelligence, and their thoughts are worth listening to.
I agree with you. Mm-hmm. Here's where I'm just going to say this. Uh-huh. Let's talk about the Will of Albus Dumbledore scene, for example. You're telling the head of state who's trying to come there and help you accomplish your goal and his goal to kick rocks. Like, you're telling him, I'm not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. I'm not going to give you any shred of information. I'm not talking about the Horcruxes. I agree. You shouldn't say that. I get it. He shouldn't talk about the Horcruxes. I understand. I agree with that. But you're talking to him as if he has no stake in the game. He's the Minister of Magic. He's got thousands. Well, I shouldn't say that. The Wizarding World, we don't know how many wizards are in the Britain area. But Harry, I'm going to bet he's responsible for more people that you don't even know exist. And you're not going to help some Joe Schmo on some street. But that guy is going to look to Rufus as, how are you helping me? Because that's his role as a public servant, as the Minister of Magic, as the head of state. He has a responsibility to everybody. Not just you, child. Not just you, Harry Potter. He has a responsibility for everybody. You could also
flip that, though. Like, if Harry doesn't succeed with what he is setting out to do, then everybody gets affected.
Come together to accomplish that.
Yeah, but
Come together.
I still don't think that he would have listened. I don't think Rufus really, truly would have taken into account anything that Harry would have wanted to say. I think it would just be, here's what I want you to do, because I'm the adult, you're the child. I tell you what to do it for me. And then use that argument of, well, aren't you going to unite? Aren't you going to try to save us? Aren't you going to try to help us? And kind of like maybe not gaslight, but
Here-
guilt trip him into
here's the
doing
problem.
things that it's like, this isn't the most effective way of communicating this message.
Here's the problem, though, and this is the ultimate answer. We see where it leads. We see where Harry and Dumbledore's view of, we're going to keep it just us, guys. Now everybody suffers.
Yeah, but that's still like putting all the blame on Harry of because you didn't unite with Rufus, then everything has fallen to pieces.
To be fair, I'm putting more of the blame on Dumbledore in this particular case, but
Okay.
I'm not absolving Harry. But in that, Dumbledore is the adult through this process. He should know better.
But I think so should Rufus. I think he should recognize that.
He's trying.
But I still think his ego is getting in the way of taking into account that this is a kid and it's his life.
I think he's a man looking for answers. And he's desperate to have answers so that he can help people and end this war. And he's frustrated because he's not getting them from the people who have those answers. And he's left handcuffed, and then he's left strung out there to get tortured and killed.
Okay, well, 2 thoughts with that. One, he's assuming they have answers. We know they don't have all the answers. They have some information that he doesn't know about, but there's a lot of stuff that they really do not know.
He's not a dumb man. He can tell if they're hiding, and I think he knows they're hiding something.
But even still, like you've agreed that he shouldn't share anything with the Horcruxes.
No, the
Horcruxes
should be off limits.
He might be thinking like, oh, they're hiding stuff, and the information they're hiding is the Horcruxes stuff.
I think it would be better, and you used the point with Lupin and Harry earlier, word choice matters.
Yes, it does.
How you come into a conversation matters. But I would like, because everybody's coming at Rufus, oh, he's antagonistic towards Harry, oh, he's this, oh, he's that. They're both using poor word choices.
This is why
They're not communicating efficiently.
This is why I teach English, because it does have like real world consequences. How you speak, how you write,
Sure.
like it affects people emotionally. And then this happens. So
Well, guess what, Elizabeth? We got one more that agrees with you.
let's hear it.
Tony, who left a comment on Deathly Hallows Chapter 9, A Place to Hide, says, I don't fault Harry either. It's hard to put your trust in someone who keeps Umbridge employed, but then makes an example out of Stan. He hasn't had a good track record with putting trust in people in authority and it working out well. So I don't blame him one bit. Mm-hmm. And obviously we talked about the Umbridge of it all. I think both of us agree Umbridge should be
She should be fired.
fired.
She was abusing children.
And probably
Stick her
in
in
prison.
Azkaban.
Yeah, she should be in prison.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I will fault Rufus, and that's probably from stuff we literally know as factual canon. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest issue I have with Rufus is why is she in your Ministry of Magic? Mm-hmm. Why is she in your administration? That is awful.
Probably politics.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. But other than that, Harry does have issues with people in authority because he does like to tell them how to do their job. He even tries to do it with Dumbledore from time to time, and Dumbledore's like, excuse you? With what life experience are you telling me what to do?
Yeah. I guess a counter of that would be, well, not necessarily a counter, but maybe a solution is like, you have to explain your thought process more. You have to actually help the other person understand the why. And I think with this situation with Lupin here, like Harry tried a little bit after Lupin was like, I regret, being with Marion Tonks and all that. And Harry was like, okay, elaborate a little bit. Here's your chance. And then it was just, he was still too emotional for it to actually be successful. But I think if Rufus wasn't emotional and explained the thought process of why I think us coming together would be the most effective, maybe he'd be more open to it. But I think that him not wanting to listen to why Harry would view this as like, I'm being used and manipulated in the same way the Ministry has always manipulated me.
I think in that specific circumstance, I think Harry's coming at it from a point of exasperation. Mm-hmm. Of, I'm tired of being
used and never listened to.
Correct.
Yeah.
So he's coming at it from an exasperated point of view. Mm-hmm. And I think Rufus is coming from a point of desperation. He knows his outs are dwindling. The walls are closing in around him. And by the way, the walls are death. Like, he is a target and things are closing in on him. So he's coming at it from a desperate point of view. Harry's coming at it from an exasperated point of view. And they're not communicating well enough to come together in the middle and figure this out.
You know what this also shows, though? Is just how important laying a proper foundation is for having success. Because if Fudge had not leaned on the Prophet to attack Harry, and if Umbridge had not been appointed to the Defense Against the Dark Arts position, then, like, Harry would be very, probably more open to working with them. The public wouldn't be having this whiplash of, you told us for a year that Harry Potter is a liar, and then you told us that actually he's like the chosen one, and now you're telling us that actually he's our enemy. Where do we actually trust? And for Rufus to try to get all the public back on board with the idea of, like, Voldemort's bad, Harry is good, we are also good, trust us, listen to us, work with us. It's really hard to do that when you have at least 2-3 years worth of time and effort working against you.
I agree with everything you said, for the record. Mm-hmm. And your sentiment is what Sandhya and Robert's books and Tony have elaborated on. But that's Fudge's administration.
Yeah.
That botched that relationship.
Yeah.
And everybody's punishing Rufus for Fudge's mistakes.
Yeah, but you know, like anytime we switch from one president to the other, the previous administration does bleed into the next administration. Like, the effects of it are still being felt by the public. So even if one person is changed out, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're starting with a fresh slate. You know? Like, we still have a mess.
There's repair work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
I understand that. Hopefully not all leaders have to step into the situation Rufus stepped into, which was a giant mess.
Yeah. Fudge, let's just admit, Fudge is going to be low on the list of great ministers of magic.
And that's fair. That's fair. And with Fudge, I know we did some episodes back in the day of where I would defend Fudge a little bit because he was also in some tough spots.
Yeah.
If you're the head of state and you have a potential real big problem,
breakouts from Azkaban, which has never happened before.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
And he chose the strategy of everybody stay calm.
He chose the easier strategy for the short term and not the better strategy for the long term.
Sure.
Yeah. It was the quick fix.
But I think what people don't understand is it is a strategy to take. It's not like he's just winging it or he's just doing it off like the seat of his pants. It's a real strategy to take.
Yeah.
And there's reasons to do it.
But again, shows the consequences of every action that occurs.
Yes. Yeah. There are consequences to every decision that you make, for sure. We have talked a lot.
Do you think anyone's still listening?
I hope so. I hope you found the conversation interesting. And I thank Sandhya and Robert's books and Tony for their comments and their insights. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the depth to which you went in your comments.
I love it when people elaborate on their answers.
Oh, it's amazing. And we really do enjoy reading all of those, whether they agree or disagree with me. It's fine. It's all good. It's about debate. It's about talking about literature, and that's what we're here to do. Mm-hmm. And we really appreciate everybody listening. Please continue to comment on Instagram and Twitter and Spotify and every place that you can. We really appreciate it. You can find us at Hogwarts a Pod. I guarantee you this poll is going to be a good one for this episode. Mm-hmm. So please participate in that. Keep telling us what you're thinking about what we're saying. And we will be back after a short break with the spoiler section. Before we get to our break sound, I'd like to acknowledge our friend Andy, who helps us produce our intros and our break sounds. If you want to hear more of Andy's work and like Formula One racing, check out the Outlap F1 podcast. It's your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. You can find them wherever you listen to podcasts, and they even have a YouTube page. So check out Andy, Cody, John, James, and Deanna, and join them on the Outlap.
Dobby has no master. Dobby is a free elf.
All right, we are back with the spoiler section of Chapter 11, The Bribe. And I think you wanted to talk a little bit about Lupin's child.
Spoiler alert, he will not be a werewolf, so all of this worry has been for nothing.
Yep.
He takes after Tonks.
Yeah, Teddy got the Metamorph Magus touch instead of the werewolf touch.
Yes.
So does that mean Teddy is going to be studied in the future on, like...
It does make you wonder if, like...
Where does her abilities have a play on that?
It'd be interesting for the Department of Mysteries to study the magic of, like, which genetics is the dominant, the werewolf or the
which magical trait is better?
Yeah.
No, but obviously that story is heartbreaking because Teddy ends up very similar to Harry with both of his parents dying in the war. Mm-hmm. So obviously it's a somber moment when that does happen, and we will get there and we will talk about it in-depthly when we do.
Yep.
But that is a little bit of Teddy Tonks. Mm-hmm. And I had just one note to go back on from the excerpt from Rita's article on Albus. And I'm just wondering, like, with Bathilda being the source that Rita got a lot of her information from, I just happen to wonder, is Bathilda actually just losing her grip a little bit? Or is Bathilda already dead and transformed into Nagini? And then it's basically a puppet for Voldy to just slander. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I don't get the impression that they'd be able to understand her if she were Nagini at that point. Because remember Hermione, like... She was purposely not talking around Hermione.
That's a good point.
Only Harry understood it.
That's a fair point.
Speaking of the article, though...
that could have been just based on Harry, though. Like, Nagini could have hyper-focused on, wait, there's another piece.
Well, that's why she kept trying to, like, direct Harry away from Hermione. And be like, little snake language. Speaking of the article, though, we know Ariana was not a squib. Was not being hidden away in the basement the way that they suspected. So, no, the Dumbledores are not like the Dursleys. Just a bit more unfortunate situation magically, which we'll get way more into later. And then, of course, with Umbridge taking the locket, that now means that we have to break into the Ministry to get that locket back. And the idea of breaking into Umbridge's office should terrify anyone. And I feel like that scene is such a highlight in the book series. I know I not defended, but I talked a lot of good things about Umbridge back in book 5, saying how she was like my favorite villain of the whole series. So I was very excited when I saw that she was going to be back, because I was like, I hate that woman so much.
Yeah, there's a lot that's kind of dropped in this chapter, and I think just having Rita and Umbridge be both name dropped and hinted towards in the same chapter is almost too much.
Yeah.
It's too much. We can't have both. Have both. We both had a note on Grimmauld Place.
Well, in chapter 10, we saw both Harry and Hermione say Voldemort's name repeatedly. And once they did that, we started seeing the Death Eaters hang around outside. And I know Lupin said there's the rumors that the Death Eaters are basically staking out any place where they think Harry might go, which is also why, side note, I think Hermione is right to still be like, Harry, let's not go to Godric's Hollow just yet. It might not be the most safe place to go. I think them being here specifically is because the magic of the taboo has drawn them to the place. It's just the magic of Grimmauld Place that stops them from being able to break in and take them out.
So my opinion on this actually changed after reading this chapter and getting like the full
context of it.
The fact that they're stalking all of the places. I just wonder if the protective enchantment bubble that is around Grimmauld Place did prevent the taboo from getting out.
I think it didn't prevent the taboo from being heard. I think it just, the fact that it's implausible and they're not part of the Secret Keepers. I mean, we see later on when Hermione, I forget which Death Eater it is that grabs hold of her, but she accidentally makes him a Secret Keeper and thus exposes all of Grimmauld Place. I think because that hasn't happened yet. That's the only reason why they're not able to get in there and take out the kids.
Yeah. Is the protocol for a taboo to just send 2 Death Eaters to whoever says the taboo?
Well, I would guess, they keep saying his name because, of course, they do. They're used to it. And I know, in the next chapter, they talk about the Death Eaters. The Muggles have watched a few of them, and they see them, start every now and then because they think they see something. If Neville Longbottom were to say Voldemort's name, I think they would be on him very quickly, and it would be who are you? Why are you saying his name? We're going to arrest you. We're going to lock you up in Malfoy's basement, and, all those things. Mm-hmm. I think it's just the magic of the house that keeps them from being able to do that.
It definitely keeps them from coming in.
Yeah.
I think that's a confirmed fact.
Yeah.
I just wonder if the taboo has gotten out or if they're just stalking Grimmauld Place because they know Grimmauld Place might be a location. Well, I think we are going to wrap it up here for the spoiler section. We had a fairly elongated, spicy non-spoiler section, so we'll wrap up the spoiler section here very quickly. Let us know what you think on all of our conversations. I know we have a lot of shout-outs to give on next week's episode as well on the topic, so let us know. Mm-hmm. We'll have a couple of polls. I think we should have a bonus poll. So look out for the poll that's going to be posted on this episode on Spotify. And then we will also have maybe a bonus poll on Twitter and Instagram with this episode that's probably going to be about the taboo. Mm. Do you think that taboo got out of Grimmauld Place? And that's what the Death Eaters outside are responding to, or they're just normally stalking the location. Mm-hmm. And then the one for this episode will most likely revolve around Rufus, because I'm me and I'm the host. No. Thank you all to those who responded and commented. I know most of you disagree with me, as does Elizabeth, but that's okay. We're talking about literature. It's fine to have a good, healthy debate. It's all good. I take no offense to any of those opinions. I welcome them. Thank you all for also giving nice, long explanations of your thoughts, too. That's always nice to actually read those and get what you guys are actually thinking. It's great to read. So thank you all for listening, and we will be back next week with Chapter 12. Thank you for listening to Hogwarts, a podcast. If you like what you've heard, please click the subscribe button on your preferred podcasting app and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Hogwarts a Pod.